We're on the cusp of a new massive One Piece timeskip. I can absolutely feel it in my bones. The way that Elbaf has been going, the information that we've been getting, and the sheer power of the opponents that are coming up in the story have really made it clear that the crew is not ready right now for the final war. And I am unbelievably confident that my man Scopper Gaban here lies at the center of all of it. And no, I'm not just saying that because I'm the biggest Scopper Gaban fanboy out there. I'm saying this because he's paralleling my actual favorite character in the story as well. A character who literally paved the entire way for One Piece's 2-year timeskip and was directly responsible for turning Luffy into a Yonko character. I'm talking about the man, the myth, the legend, Dark King Rayleigh. And I mean, it should be pretty clear that Scopper Gaban and Rayleigh are on pretty much equal footing here. After all, they are the two wings of the first Pirate King. Rayleigh was his right-hand man, and Scopper was his left one. And these two were what Zoro and Sanji are now basically to Luffy. And to no surprise, I do think that they're being presented as having a very similar role in the series, because both of their introductions are incredibly similar. The arcs that they're part of are very similar in structure and probably goal, and there have been tons and tons of other hints that this is gonna happen since, honestly, probably chapter 1 of the story. Alright, but let's take a quick breath here. What do I actually mean by all that? Well, look at what Rayleigh does during his first appearance in the story. He explains some very important stuff to Luffy and the Straw Hats, even offering to tell them about Laugh Tale, and then he reappears later on to save them from a threat that they could just not handle in the form of Admiral Kizaru and the Pacifista. In this very arc, we have the first appearance of Luffy's great allies in Wano, Eustace Kid and Trafalgar Law as well, and afterwards, Rayleigh talks briefly with Kuma, who sends all the Straw Hats flying away and then shows up after Marineford to finally train Luffy. So, how does all of this actually line up with Scopper Gaban? Well, Scopper first appears and then explains some stuff about Loki, mixed races, and the weird powers used by the Holy Knights to Luffy, Zoro, and Nami, and he even specifically says secrets are meant to be shared. And then has a flashback that shows him directly filling that very same role as Rayleigh in Roger's life as well. Now, in the Elbaf arc, we have the appearance of a new powerful character, Loki, who appears to be a great and important ally like Law and Kid. And after all of this occurs, Scopper then reappears alongside the giant warrior pirates and is framed to be the one who's going to battle all the Holy Knights in order to save the day. Really, the only missing section right now is the part where he actually saves them from a threat that they can't handle, which I will talk about in just a moment, and also the part where the crew separates and grows stronger thanks to Kuma. And well, I gotta say, I sadly can't predict the future, and I also don't know what's actually going on in Oda Sensei's head, but I do know that it's looking more and more likely that Scopper will be the one who ultimately fends off the Holy Knights while the Straw Hats manage to escape. But there is one more point that I do want to talk about before I talk about the Holy Knights and Scopper Gaban's full role in the story, because I do think it really helps secure the parallels between Sabaody and Elbaf. Because something I wanted to call out specifically here was the Kuma part of this entire equation. Here's the deal. Kuma was essential to the timeskip because his devil fruit, the pawpaw fruit, let him push the Straw Hats to various islands from his past in order to train them up for the second half of the Grand Line. But also, I do think it's really important to remember that Kuma's real first interaction with the Straw Hats was during Thriller Bark, the arc that came right before Sabaody. In other words, he had a 2-arc storyline with the crew, which, who knew, lines up perfectly with what's going on right now with Egghead Island and now Elbaf. Kuma first appeared during Egghead and helped the Straw Hats escape the Gorosei, and he's now just sitting around powerlessly on Elbaf not doing anything. But that's not exactly true either, because the genius scientists Vegapunk and also my boy Frankie here are also right now on Elbaf. They have the means to repair Kuma, and while they probably can't restore his humanity, yet at least, they definitely could get him functioning once again and help the Straw Hats escape another time. After all, it has been presented since the beginning of this arc that the Straw Hats should not stay on Elbaf for too long. Now, the quote that we got at the beginning of this arc was a quote from Louis Arnott, a famous explorer in the One Piece world that literally says, do not linger here for too long, and I'm kind of starting to think that this was Oda's way of telling us, hey guys, listen up, the crew is not gonna have a great time here. Now, at this point, I've pretty much abandoned the idea that a weird time dilation thing is going on, and that's kind of causing the crew to stay on Elbaf and accidentally have a time skip, but after seeing how the arc has been going, and also, you know, Scopper Gaban being there for so long, I do think it's much more intentional and will actually happen. Now, some people were speculating that due to some things about size, how theoretical time stuff works, and that Louis Arnold stuff, people assumed that it was a time thing, but not anymore in my opinion. I think that theory is dead. And with that, my quick little Kuma and Arnaud side thing here is done as well, so we can now weave back into how Scopper's gonna train up Luffy and company for their inevitable, like, insanely difficult fights in the final war, and why. Here's the deal. Rayleigh's job was, of course, to teach Luffy about Haki and then how to use Haki so that he could actually square up with the Logia fruit users like Kizaru, and also develop his own fighting power so he could defeat a Yonko-level threat like Kaido. And while I think it's gonna be similar, I think that Scopper has a far more specific job, because he needs to prepare Luffy, and probably honestly the entire crew, for this very big and unspoken immortality problem that we have with the Holy Knights and the Gorosei. Which I gotta say is very similar to the Logia problem before the time skip, as we have characters that we just cannot touch even though we are pretty powerful at this point. And this actually seems to be part of Oda's great plan, as it's been very clear to me for a long time, if you've watched this channel you'll know what I'm talking about, that the Roger pirates were purposefully scattered in strategic places across the Grand Line to prepare the next Joy Boy for what we now know is the Third World War of the One Piece world. Now, at least Gunko has finally confirmed that war part in chapter 1146, but it had pretty much been all confirmed since the Mural and Harley text that we got in chapter 1138. So, Shanks in chapter 1 pushed Luffy, the user of the Nika fruit, to become a great pirate after Luffy ate it. Next up, Crocus, the doctor of the Roger pirates, was stationed at the entrance of the Grand Line and was responsible for teaching the crew about their goal, Laugh Tale, and also gave them a log post. Afterwards, we had Rayleigh, the first major trainer at the halfway point, who needed to get Luffy's Haki up to par, and now, at the end of the Grand Line, we have Scopper, a man who most likely will hold the secret to actually damaging and potentially killing the Holy Knights. After all, we know for a fact that he did fight them because this happened on God Valley. And while it may not technically be confirmed that Scopper himself fought a Holy Knight and discovered the secret to their immortality, we do know that they were on the same island together, and Loki alluded to the fact that the Holy Knights appear to stop fighters who had the potential to conquer the world back in chapter 1145. Loki said here that if he had achieved Rox's fame and strength, he'd already have dealt with the Holy Knights, and he wanted to become king of the world. I don't know about you, but right now it kind of feels like only two men ever really came close to that goal, and those were Rox and Roger, so I find it very likely that Roger's crew had interacted with the Holy Knights during their journey as well. And if that did occur, it's very likely that one of his strongest crew members, Scopper Gaban, in the top 3, would at least have an idea of how to take them out or fight them, or at least bypass their immortality. Plus, of course, ever since Saint Summers appeared in the story, it seems really likely that Scopper Gaban and him have some sort of deep narrative tie as well, because they both are focused on love, seem to be the same age roughly, and even have a very similar hairstyle and vibe about them for some reason. And considering that their ages line up pretty nicely, I wouldn't be too surprised if we find out that Scopper fought Summers on God Valley and maybe even lost to him due to the entire immortality power that the Holy Knights have going on. And so maybe he went to Elbaf and settled down so that he could finally learn about how to defeat this power and then teach the future generation and the next Joy Boy what he actually learned here. Because I think it would make a ton of sense, right? That a secret about a long forgotten immortality technique dating back to the Void Century would be hidden somewhere in the library of Ohara, which it turns out is now on Elbaf, or even just straight up on Elbaf due to its deep roots and age and ties to the Void Century. And so to me at least, least, it now really seems to be on Scopper to help Luffy and the entire gang to figure out what they can do in order to even fight with the Holy Knights and then later on with the Gorosei. Now, whether that's going to be a new type of haki or a variation of it like Ryo was in Wano, or maybe even a completely different power system similar to the Abyss, that I am not quite certain of at this point. But all I know is that when you really look at who the Holy Knights are and their powers, Luffy is just by default not ready for them because they can't be killed. Seriously, look at what Gunko alone, we don't think she's the strongest, right, is capable of in this chapter. Her versatility with her arrows let her do absolutely crazy reality-bending things like possibly even breaking future sight, redirecting attacks, manifesting weapons, and altering her own body. Then we've got Killingham, who can manifest giant dream demons and has the transformations of a mythical Logia fruit, which I don't know if you remembered from the story, but are insanely broken. Just look at Yamato, Kaido, Marco, and oh yeah, Luffy. All of these are beyond busted fighters. So I can only imagine the additional properties of the Kirin fruit, one of the most important mythological creatures in all of Chinese and Japanese culture. And then we've got Summers here, who has been shown to completely stop anyone with compassion and love in their heart, something that we do know Luffy has heaps and heaps of in his own. But of course, none of these broken powers hold even a candle to the real threat. Yeah, that's right. I do think that in a roundabout way, with his current Gear 5 powers, Luffy could probably find a way to handle those Holy Knights and their devil fruits, but they aren't the ones that the big man really has to worry about. Because that person is of course the commander of the Holy Knights, Figureland Shamrock, Shanks' evil twin brother, you remember, who would probably stump Luffy based on what we've seen from him at this point. And I'm pretty confident that the reason that he even appeared and immediately flexed on Loki was Oda's way of scaling him relative to Shanks, which makes a lot of sense. They are brothers and both trained by incredibly strong figures like Garling and Roger. And I mean, come on, just Shamrock's sword already seems beyond broken, and I cannot even begin to imagine what he's actually capable of in the final war. And honestly, straight up, whatever that is gonna be, Luffy is not ready for it. Shanks one-shot Kid, a dude powerful and durable enough to square up against 2 Yonko for a whole night. And I don't care what you say about him being useless Captain Kid. Heck, I mean, I think he is, but you can't deny that the dude was bloodied, beaten, and still kept fighting after, you know, taking direct hits from both Kaido and Big Mom. And then you're telling me that after he completely healed up, Shanks just one-shot him? I mean, I'm sorry, but if Shamrock is that powerful, Luffy, even in his Gear 5 form, isn't gonna do anything against this man. Especially, you know, with the entire immortality thing on top of all the other powers, which just goes to show you how far Luffy actually still is from the likes of an Emu or probably a Blackbeard, since, I mean, presumably they are the actual final villains of the series, right? Which again is all the more reason for yet another time skip. A period of time where everyone can be properly trained up to at least hold a candle to the really big threats at hand. I mean, let's be real here for a second. Right now, when you really look at it, there are only 4 or maybe 5 Straw Hats that are even close to hanging with an actual fighter. Those are, of course, Luffy, Zoro, Sanji, Jinbei, and then maybe Brook. Like, the rest of the crew has powers, yes, but without more time to learn, like, Haki. How do not all the Straw Hats know Haki at this point and level up their entire toolkit? They just cannot logically make it through the final saga and actually have an impact. So I do think it makes the most sense to have Kuma for, yes, hopefully the last and final time, save them here and then put them where they need to be. Or at the very least, get the entire Sunny out of Dodge and have each of them pair up with a figure that makes sense in order to train them. Like, imagine if Oda gives Frankie a couple of years to train with Vegapunk. The dude could potentially get to the level of a Seraphim himself. Or if Usopp actually learned to truly use his observation haki, maybe even future sight. We need a time skip in the story. And honestly, if Oda or his editors have been paying attention to modern anime and manga trends, they'll probably do it anyways. I mean, we do know that One Piece is a flexible series that changes its timeline and structure based on the editor feedback that Oda receives, and several massive series in the past have done this very exact thing in very recent history to pretty critical success. I would argue it has been a super common trend for a series to have a big time skip moment before the final war battle part of the final saga. If you want, I can quite literally speedrun a bunch of you right now. Like Black Clover just did it before the Spade Kingdom arc. Attack on Titan did it with its final arc, and even sports shonen like Blue Lock and Haikyuu have big end of series time skip moments to get their main characters on par with the final big opponents. So I would argue that this is something that One Piece really needs right now to not only make sense, but also to show the other shonen how it's really done, if you get my drift here. Because let's be real, no one does time skips better than One Piece, and honestly, they will if Oda doesn't pull the trigger on boosting up the Straw Hats' powers at some point. And while I'm really excited to see what he would do with the entire crew, I'm incredibly confident in how he would specifically pull this off with Luffy. That's right, I'm about to tell you exactly how I think Luffy would train to reach this next level, right after I remind you that over on the Ohara Patreon, I've been pumping out a bunch of fun new content like a weekly One Piece newsletter you can get for free, early podcast episodes with big creators, and early chapter reviews for your very eager viewers out there as well. So check it out, it helps me out a bunch, and I think we make a bunch of fun content for you as well. Anyhow, with that out of the way and the bills being paid, I'm also incredibly eager to see Luffy's training arc alongside his new best buddy, Loki. Because that's right, I'm pretty confident that if this time skip thing were to actually happen, Luffy would probably be thrown onto an island with Loki and thus level up by fighting him for, I don't know, maybe literally like a year or two. I might be biased here, but I think that time skip are honestly one of the coolest parts of storytelling because it's a natural way for characters to bond, grow, and even change their entire demeanor without having to, go through years and years of writing it. And these two guys here definitely need to forge a bond unlike any other if they plan on ever defeating Imu, the Holy Knights, World Hunger, which I just assume they want to break because these boys eat a lot. So why would I even think that Luffy and Loki would train together in a big time skip here though? Well, Scarbergaban himself seems to have a pretty good relationship somehow with Loki, and I do feel like Luffy has formed one as well. I mean, it's not exactly subtle here. Oda has been mirroring Luffy's entire arc with Loki's backstory. Just look at the facts here. They were both powerful young men who wanted to follow the greatest pirate of their era and then eventually set sail to do it themselves. They've got incredible compassion towards animals, love food, and are honestly just simple and straightforward. And oh yeah, they have probably both mythical powerful devil fruits. In other words, they're two peas in a pot, and I do think that Scopper realizes that better than anyone else, which is why he gave Luffy the key in order to free Loki. Because let's be real, he had no business doing that if Loki's actually a bad guy, and I do think that he wants Luffy and Loki to be best buddies, because that way he can eventually use Loki to train up Luffy in order to defeat the Holy Knights and at some point the Gorosei, who I just assume are even more powerful. And I genuinely think that Loki's haki, or straight up his hammer Ragnar's powers, whatever it might be, might hold part of the secret to defeating the immortality conundrum that the Holy Knights are causing for the entire story right now. Because I don't know, but like something about the way that hammer and Loki are being discussed is kind of selling me on that idea. Like that hammer can cause lightning the size of islands to appear, so I kind of feel like it might be able to defeat a Holy Knight or two if it landed a pretty good clean hit on them, or maybe that lightning is being caused by some hidden power that Loki learned to tap into and Luffy will now need to unlock himself as well. It kind of reminds me also of Joy Boy's big hockey knot that got released by Emeth, that was on a completely different level and got rid of all the Gorosei. So I do feel like once Luffy and Loki hit the scene during this Elbaf battle, we'll get a glimpse of it as well, probably at the expense of the entire Atom Tree, based on all these fire and lightning comments people have been throwing around, and then Luffy might just end up training with Loki to unlock that very same type of power. More importantly though, I think a time skip training arc between just Loki and just Luffy would really help their bond flourish in a way that makes it feel way less rushed, because obviously Loki is a super important character for the endgame of the series. Remember, he's been teased ever since the Whole Cake Island arc, and the mural in chapter 1138 seems to depict a figure just like him on it alongside Luffy and a giant mermaid like Shirahoshi here. So I would say it's pretty cut and dry that this dude is here to stay and play a big role. But also it would feel really out of place for Oda to just throw him our way and then just go, here's a Deus Ex Machina guy at the end of the series in order to help Luffy win. And in case you don't know what that means, Deus Ex Machina basically means you have a plot element that just appears at a crucial time to resolve a seemingly impossible situation or plotline. That's what Loki would be in the final saga if he doesn't get fleshed out more. Which again, I think would be the perfect excuse for a time skip. He can spend a year or two or even just a month or two with Luffy, and then their bond would make so much more sense. It's not gonna just be some super random best buddies in a week or two dynamic. It's over a year of blood, sweat, and tears together to truly form a bond of brotherhood. Plus, yes, I'm gonna admit it, I just do want to have more Loki in the series because his design is sick and he's just super cool and strong. So why wouldn't we want more of him in the story, right? All right, but now that we've covered what points to a time skip happening and why it should happen, how would this even kick off and what would it look like? I mean, surely it wouldn't just be Elbaf burning to the ground and then boom, 2 years later, here we are, right? And like, of course not, that doesn't make any sense. I think that there was a very specific threat set up during the Egghead Island arc that Oda will actually use here for the major end of the series time skip. What I'm talking about here is the execution of Garp the hero. Because when you really think about it, it is seriously straight up the perfect parallel to finish up the pre-time skip cycle that Oda seems to be working with in the last couple of arcs. Sabaody set up Impel Down, which then set up Marineford with, you know, Ace's death, and now, theoretically at least, even though some people might not want to talk about it, the same could very well happen for Garp. I mean, Garp led the raid on Hachinosu to free Kobe and was then caught in the process. This kind of fills the Impel Down part of the story after the first time skip, and I do know it seems like it should be Luffy doing another prison break here, but I don't think Luffy is in the same spot that he was pre-time skip the first time around. Like, Luffy's new role isn't the same as his old one. I think that he's now supposed to step into the Whitebeard role this time around. He's a Yonko, he's got the Grand Fleet, and he can make a really big move if he really wanted to, which is why I think that it would make a ton of sense if after Elbaf, Luffy leads a raid on Hachinosu himself or another island that Blackbeard threatens to execute Garp on. And that plan could probably fail miserably, you know, due to the arrival of the Holy Knights or the Admirals, you know, the way that Blackbeard screwed things up during the first Marineford. But honestly, that's just my personal thoughts because I think it would make a pretty nice setup and explain a lot of things that Oda has been, you know, setting up throughout the story recently. But ultimately, I just think that Garp's execution is gonna be what, one way or another, kicks off the great end of the series time skip. Because it also just completes his own story. He stood by and watched Ace getting killed, and so I think it only makes sense from a narrative perspective that he either stops someone else from being offed or is offed himself. And this would of course be the perfect kickstart for the endgame, as it would let Kobe or Smoker shift into that new Garp role and then let Luffy have all the inspiration that he needs to cut down the Holy Knights, Blackbeard, Emu, whoever. You name them, Luffy is now able to kill them, or defeat them. I guess he doesn't really kill people. But I will admit here, speaking of Emu, what the heck are they actually doing, right? Like, based on the mural and the Egghead Island arc, it kind of seems likely that their plan is to access or recreate the Forbidden Sun. So now the only big question is, what actually is the Forbidden Sun? Like, why is it so important? Well, I think that I found out the answer to that question and exactly how it was created and why it's so important. So if you want to find out and really understand what's going on here, check out this video right here where I break it down in a lot of detail. Otherwise, thanks so much for watching. Shout out to all my Patreons. You guys are the best and you all should become one in my humble opinion. So link in the description. Otherwise, I will see you in the next one.